It's just as good at building us up. So, Lord, I pray today that we would be in a position to receive from you, that our ears would be open, our minds would be prepared, and our hearts would be ready to receive from you. I ask this in your mighty and precious name. Amen. All right, so last week we have been going through a series on the 7 deadly sins, and we looked at the sin of wrath and the heavenly virtue of patience that is meant to counteract it. Now, one of the common misconceptions surrounding the sin of wrath is that wrath and anger are the same thing. They are related but not the same. I would say that wrath is an unhealthy manifestation of anger, just as greed is an unhealthy manifestation of desire. Desire and anger are not sinful or wrong by themselves. They actually can lead to positive outcomes. Because anger at its core is a response to an injustice, whether that injustice is real or perceived. And then the goal of anger is to bring about justice. So anger can be good when properly focused, since it encourages us to seek justice, bring about justice, punish wrongdoing. All of these are good things when done properly. The problem with wrath is that we become consumed by our anger. It blinds us, and instead of seeking justice, we are now just seeking vengeance, whether that is appropriate or not. This is because wrath suppresses our wisdom and makes us foolish in our great rage. In this foolishness, we can overpunish people who have wronged us, or even punish the wrong people, because we are so angry and unthinking in that wrath that we do not even take the time and care to make sure that our wrath is even aimed at the correct target. The most damaging aspect of wrath is that it puts us at odds with God, because your wrath gives the devil a foothold from which to influence your thoughts and actions, where he feeds that wrath and helps it grow, to the level that you begin to put yourself in the place of God when it comes to handing out punishment. God is quite clear that vengeance and punishment are his to pour out. Sometimes he punishes them directly, but many times God uses proper earthly authorities to punish wrongdoing. But when we push those aside, we are putting ourselves in the place of God as both judge and executioner. We are to build patience to counteract wrath. By practicing patience, we can allow time to let the fires of wrath calm down, enough to apply wisdom and seek God for proper courses of action. It also encourages us to leave that role of punishment to God and the proper authorities. In order to grow in patience, we must rely on God and do one of the scariest things we can do, which is pray for patience. We also need to pray for help in the moments when we are angry, that God would help us in quelling that wrath. We must seek and rely on God in this area and in all areas. These sins that we are looking at are all unhealthy manifestations of normal feelings. And when we allow our sinful nature to run wild, it comes with all kinds of unhealthy manifestations. Yet God has good and heavenly virtues that we are to walk in and live in. The sin that we are going to be examining this week is the deadly sin of envy, and the corresponding heavenly virtue of kindness. Now, at first glance, it might appear that envy and greed are very similar, or could even be the same. You might be thinking that we talked about greed just a few weeks ago, so there probably isn't a whole lot new to hear in this sin. Now, there are similarities between the two, but there are also some key differences. The first thing I think we need to do is clearly define the difference between greed and envy, so we understand the difference and what we're talking about. Because greed and envy are so similar because they have that same root. As I said, wrath is an unhealthy manifestation of anger, and greed is an unhealthy manifestation of desire. And envy has that same root as greed, which is why they're so similar. It is also rooted in desire. Desire is simply wanting something. And there's a lot of good reasons that we would want something. We want food to maintain our bodies. We want money to pay for the things we need and support our families. We want to get married and have children. All of these are good desires and good applications of desire. But both greed and envy are when desire goes bad. Greed is a general desire for more of something. You want more money. You want more power. You want more whatever it is. You just have that empty pit of greed inside you that just says more, 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 more. It's a very general desire. Envy, by contrast, is a desire for something that belongs to someone else. Greed doesn't tell you that I want that person's stuff. Greed just tells you you want stuff. And if people are in the way, then they become an obstacle. But it is not the person that is the object. It is the stuff with greed. With envy, it is the person. You begin to desire what a specific person has. Let me give you an example. It would be greed for me to desire a nicer house for myself. To look at my house and say, you know what? I want a better house. I want a nicer house. So that's greed. I'm looking at all these nice houses and I'm saying, man, it would be great if I had that house. That would be awesome. Envy, on the other hand, would be to look at someone else's house. Like if I were to look at Steve's house, for example, and say, man, Steve's got a great house. I want Steve's house. Because now it's not I want a better house. It's not I want something nicer for myself. It's I want what he has. That is the difference. Thank you. I don't actually want to take your house away from you. I'm just using it as an example. See, greed leads to feelings of emptiness because enough is never enough with greed. But envy leads to feelings of discontentment and resentment because you want what someone else has. Envy is not limited to a person's wealth either. It could be. It is a common thing to desire somebody's money, but it is also very common to envy another person's lifestyle, family, spouse, authority, job, many other things. You can be envious of lots of different things, not just their wealth. Now, with a better understanding of what envy is and how it differs from greed, we can look at how envy harms us, which can serve as warning signs that we can use to see if envy is taking hold in us and where envy has taken hold of us. And if we can recognize where these things are at work in us, we can grow in kindness and know where we need to grow in kindness. Then we can know how to grow closer to God in this area. There are 4 ways in which envy harms us. And the first way that envy harms us is that envy causes conflict and strife in your relationships. Now, this is not a crazy leap to see how feelings of envy can harm your relationships. If we're consumed with desire for the belongings or life of someone else, it breeds resentment toward that person because they have what we want, or on some level, what we think we should have. And that resentment often leads to harsh treatment of that person. Envy does not lead to good things in our relationships, as James 3:16 says. Envy leads to all kinds of evil outcomes instead. And when these evil things are brought into your life and into your relationships, it breeds resentment first, but it does not end there. What begins with envy leads to much worse outcomes. In James 3:16, it says, "For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there." So he's saying that if there is envy in your heart towards somebody, it doesn't just say that, oh, it's going to cause you to do maybe some evil. It says every evil thing can be brought out of envy. Envy is the root from which so many other bad things arise because we resent people so much for having the things that we want that we begin to destroy our relationships over jealousy. Envy causes us to desire the life of another, and that inevitably leads us to harboring feelings of resentment. And that resentment will always lead to a wedge of separation in that relationship. After all, why would you want to have a relationship with someone who has something that you desire or should be yours in your mind? And once that wedge of separation enters a relationship, it doesn't just stop there. It doesn't just stop with you wanting distance from this person because you are envious of them. It creeps in and it starts with feelings of jealousy. And then you don't want to be around them at all because all it does is remind you of that person that you're envious of. So first, you want to distance yourself a little bit. Then you don't want to see them at all. And once you separate yourself from a person because of your feelings of envy, it's not long at all before you begin to not care about that person at all. And that can lead you to now beginning to commit evil acts against them. A perfect example of this that we can find in the Bible is the story of Joseph and his brothers. Now, Joseph was the second youngest of the 12 sons of Jacob, but he was the first son of Jacob's favorite wife, Rachel. Little aside, this is not what we're talking about, but Jacob had a couple of wives. Anytime you see somebody with more than one wife, never ends well. It always brings chaos into your relationships, and boy, did it for Jacob. He had a wife that he clearly loved more than the other one, and then that led to conflict among his children because he showed favoritism to the son of his favorite wife, which is Joseph. So anyway, Jacob did not exactly hide the fact that Joseph was his favorite son, even though he was, again, the second youngest. And in Jewish culture, the older you were, the oldest sons were always given all the preferential treatment. But Jacob didn't do that. He showed Joseph all the favor. So he had 10 older brothers who weren't exactly crazy about him because their dad made no bones about the fact that Joseph was his favorite. And this caused his older brothers, to become very envious of the favor that Jacob was showing to him. They became so envious of that favor that it caused them to resent Joseph. And they didn't want to spend time with him, and they separated themselves from him. And eventually, it led them to sell their brother into slavery in Egypt to get rid of him. I think it is fair to call that conflict and strife in your relationships. And when envy is fully grown, it can lead to even worse manifestations. I know you might say, you're talking about brothers selling a brother into slavery over envy. How could it get much worse than that? It can cause your relationships to break down so far that you actually desire the full destruction of a person. The first murder in the Bible, the first murder in the human race was when Cain killed his brother Abel. And that was a murder motivated by envy. Why did Cain kill Abel? Because they both offered sacrifices to God. God accepted Abel's, but rejected Cain's. And Cain was so consumed by envy and jealousy over the favor that God showed to Abel that he killed his brother. Because Cain desired that favor, and it drove him mad to where he killed his own brother. So if feelings of jealousy towards a person have strained or even destroyed your relationships with people, that is a sign that envy is at work in you. It is fine to look at the life that someone has and be like, man, I'd love to be successful like this person. But when it turns that corner and starts to cause you to separate yourself from that person and become so consumed with jealousy that you actually want to see that person fail because of all the success that they have, because of that envy that you have in your heart, that shows you that you have gone from simple desire into envy. And you need to turn to God if that is the case. And you have to seek to grow in kindness towards that person. Because as we are going to discuss, kindness is the way to overcome those feelings of envy. But the second way that envy harms you is that envy corrupts your spirit. Now, when I tell you that your relationships with people whom you love can be harmed or even destroyed in envy when that takes hold, that probably seems a little crazy to you. You might look at your relationships, the people that you're around, and the people that you love, and say, there's no way that I would ever allow envy to turn me against people like that. You look at stories like Joseph being turned on by his brothers, and you look at that and you're like, there's no way I could ever find myself treating a family member the way that Joseph's brothers treated him. Everything inside you may say, there's no way that that could ever happen to me. My relationships are too strong. That just isn't in my nature. Now, that may be true of you now, but envy has a way of working its way into you, and it seems so small at first. But if it is not dealt with, it begins to corrupt your spirit. And in Proverbs 14:30, we are told of the corrupting and corrosive effects that envy has on us. It takes us from a place of strength where we think there's no possible way our relationships could ever be harmed by something like jealousy or envy, and it takes you to a place of weakness when it comes to your relationships with others and your overall spiritual health and happiness. In Proverbs 14:30, It says, a sound heart is life to the body, but envy is rottenness to the bones. Now, what happens to bones when they rot? They get weak. Right now, you might think that I would never allow jealousy or envy to destroy my relationships. And that might be true of you now, because right now your bones are strong. But when envy sneaks in and takes hold, it takes hold of those bones and weakens them to where they can no longer stand up under the strain that jealousy puts on them. It weakens your spirit so that it now takes hold and corrupts you. Not only that, but much like greed, envy can and will destroy your contentment. Greed does this by telling you it's never enough, that what you have is never going to be enough to satisfy. Envy does it because it makes us feel we can never be happy until we have what that other person has. When we constantly compare ourselves to the life that we have to someone else and the life that they have, it never leads to happiness or contentment. As Theodore Roosevelt once famously said, comparison is the thief of joy. Envy also has the ability to make us blind to all the good things that God has blessed us with. When we are caught up in envy and it begins to corrupt our spirit, and then we do not think that we have anything good in our lives, because we have to have that thing that the other person has. And we begin to mistakenly believe that there is nothing good in our lives worth having because we don't have that one thing that that person has that we want. One of the lies that envy tells you is that everything in your life would be perfect if you just had that thing that envy tells you that you need from that other person. Everything would be perfect if you just had that guy's job, or that guy's wife, or that guy's house, or whatever it is. Envy tells you your life would be perfect. That's the one thing you're missing. And that guy over there has it. And that leads you to resentment towards that person, and it corrupts your spirit and weakens your relationship with God. Because now you think, if only God would have blessed me with something like whatever that guy has that you want, you would be happy. It makes you become bitter, and you think that there are no blessings in your life at all because you don't have that one blessing that you want. And this leads to a loss of faith in God eventually, because we start to doubt that God even cares about us. As I said, envy will blind you to the blessings that God has given you because it's not that one that you want, that someone else has. So you begin to doubt that God loves you at all or has good things in mind for you at all. Because if he did, he'd give you that thing that you wanted. He'd give you that thing that that other guy has. And if you begin to believe all those things, you might start to doubt God entirely. Because if he were real, he would have blessed you in the way that you wanted him to, with all those things that the other guy has that you think should be yours. And if you believe that, if you believe that you are somehow cursed because you are not blessed like someone else, or you believe that God is somehow withholding blessings from you, that could be a good sign that envy is at work in your spirit and it is rotting you from the core. The third way that envy harms us is that envy is a gateway to other sins. When envy takes hold of us, it puts us into a mindset. And this mindset is not a good one or a God-glorifying one. In James 3:14 through 16, we are told that envy leads to wisdom that is of the world. We talked about James 3:16 already, that it leads to all kinds of evil actions. This means that envy opens the door in us to allow all kinds of evil thoughts to come in and take hold. And evil thoughts lead to evil actions. James 3, beginning in verse 14, it says, "But if you have bitter envy and self-seeking in your hearts, do not boast and lie against the truth. This wisdom does not descend from above, but is earthly, sensual, demonic. For where envy and self-seeking exist, confusion and every evil thing are there." As I said earlier, envy causes harm to our relationships, and that is true. But the manner in which it does this is by encouraging us to commit sinful and evil acts against one another in an attempt to get what they have, or at very least, we want to punish them for having that thing that we wanted and could not have because they have it. Envy is harmful enough to us because it isolates us from the people that we should have relationship with, and it rots our spirit. But it is all the more harmful to us because it draws us into even more sin, which multiplies the harm to us even further. A great example of this in the Bible is found in 1 Samuel 18, verses 8 through 11. I want to set the stage for you here. During this time, Saul is the king of Israel, and David has just slain Goliath. As a reward, Saul takes David with him to his capital and sets him over a group of fighting men. And David finds great success as God is with him. And I also want to point out to you that at this point, the prophet Samuel had already anointed David as the next king over Israel, but he has not yet taken the throne because he's still going to allow Saul to sit the throne until he dies. But David becomes much beloved by the people. And they start singing his praises as he returns from battle, saying that Saul has slain thousands, but David tens of thousands. And due to his envy over the people's love of David and the very clear favor that God has put on him, it prompts this kind of evil action from Saul. In 1 Samuel 18, beginning in verse 8, it says, "Then Saul was very angry, and the saying displeased him. And he said, 'They have ascribed to David 10,000s, and to me they have ascribed only thousands. Now what more can he have but the kingdom?' So Saul eyed David from that day forward. And it happened on the next day that the distressing spirit from God came upon Saul, and he prophesied inside the house. So David played music with his hand, as at other times. But there was a spear in Saul's hand, and Saul cast the spear, for he said, 'I will pin David to the wall.' But David escaped his presence twice." Look at what happens. Look at where envy has led Saul. It led him to anger. It led him to resentment. It led him to jealousy over the favor that God had given to David. And instead of saying, "Look at the great things that David has done for my kingdom," he looks at him and says, "Look at the heart that the people have for him. Pretty soon they're going to want to give him what's mine. I want the favor. I want the love of the people. I want the favor of God. So if I can't have it because David has it, I'm going to pin him to the wall with this spear, and that way I'll at least punish him for having what should be mine." Saul tries to kill David. Not once, it says, but twice, because of feelings of envy. He is so worried that David is going to take his kingdom away, so this leads him to attempt the sin of murder. We talked earlier about Joseph's brothers selling him into slavery due to their envy over their father's favor. Cain killed Abel because he was envious of God's favor of his brother's offering. Feelings of envy almost never stop in simple jealousy. I'm not saying they're always going to end in physical murder. Otherwise, there would be far more murders, I think, if jealousy always ended in murder. But I do want you to remember something. If you think that means that you're off the hook and you don't have anything to worry about because you've never thrown a spear at someone that you were jealous of. In the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus says that if you hate your brother in your heart, that is morally like you murdering them. This means that even if you have not allowed your envy of someone to manifest in the physical action of murder, but you harbor resentment and hate towards that person that you are envious of, you are not off of the hook, morally speaking. So if your feelings of jealousy lead you to commit acts of evil, to either punish those who have what you desire or in an attempt to get what they have, not only does this show you that envy is clearly at work in you, but it is also advancing and it is beginning to manifest in other forms of sin in your life. And when that happens, very rarely does it stop or get better on its own. You need to counteract it with the Spirit of God and kindness, or it's going to continue to get worse. The fourth way that envy harms us is that envy hinders your relationship with God. This goes hand in hand with that rot that envy puts into your spirit that we talked about earlier. This makes you further and further away from God. But it does more than just that. We all have times in our lives where we walk closer with God and times in our life where we maybe not walking quite as close with God. Distance in your relationship with God is bad enough. But there is a difference between regular distance and dangerous distance. Dangerous distance is when you are in danger of no longer having a meaningful relationship with God, a relationship that leads to salvation. If you think I'm overstating the danger here, I mean, after all, we're just talking about simple envy and jealousy, right? How can that be dangerous to my relationship with God? If you think I'm overstating the danger, I would encourage you to look no further than Galatians 5:19 through 21. You might say, I get that envy's bad. I get that I shouldn't have those feelings. I get that I should try to work against those. But it's not really going to jeopardize my salvation. It's not really going to jeopardize my relationship with God, right? It's bad, but it's not that bad. Well, that's not what the word says. Here we are given a list of the works of the flesh by the Apostle Paul. And what he has to say at the end of this list shows you just how dangerous these things are to us. In Galatians 5:19 through 21, it says, "Now the works of the flesh are evident, which are adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lewdness, idolatry, sorcery, hatred, contentions, jealousies, outbursts of wrath, selfish ambition, dissensions, heresies, envy, murder, drunkenness, revelries, and the like, of which I tell you beforehand, just as I also told you in time past, that those who practice such things will not inherit the kingdom of God." I don't think Paul could be any more clear here. If you practice these things, then the kingdom of God will not be yours. Now, before you panic too much, this is not saying that if you experience these things, you're out. It's not saying that if you fall into these things from time to time, that you are out. It is saying if you practice these things, you are out. What's the difference? The difference is that practicing something means that you have made a lifestyle out of it. We actually talked about this in Sunday school earlier. We talked about the difference between falling into sin and making sin a lifestyle. And that is the word that is happening. That is the word that's being used here. He's talking about a lifestyle of sin, of which envy is one. Singular acts in these areas can be forgiven by God, but being given over to these sinful areas and these sinful acts does not lead to salvation. Envy takes your eyes off of God, so much so that you cease to have a meaningful relationship with Him. Another way it hinders your relationship with God is that it takes your heart out of alignment with God's, because it makes you unloving. It's not a stretch to say that when you have those feelings of envy and resentment towards someone else, that you cease to be loving toward that person. And as we know, God is love. He describes himself that way many times. And so if we are to be in alignment with him, we must love as well. In John 13:35, we are told that love is the marker that we belong to God. And in 1 Corinthians 13:4, we are told what love looks like. We are given things that love is and things that love is not. And one of those things that love is not is envious. 1 Corinthians 13:4 says, "Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up." Look at that. We have the virtue of kindness being described as what love is, and we have the sin of envy being described as what love is not. If we are God's disciples, we must love everyone, our friends, our enemies, all of those around us. Even that person that you're jealous of, you are called to love. That means that you must show them kindness and not be envious. Because if you are harboring feelings of envy in your heart, and it has not yet affected your relationship with God, first off, I would argue that it probably has and you're just blind to it. But even if it hasn't, if it's so early on that it has not yet affected your relationship with God, it very soon will. And that can have eternal consequences for you. Now, we are told that we should grow in kindness to counter the sin of envy. We are told that love is kind. But how does kindness counter envy? What do we even mean by kindness? I know that it might seem like a painfully obvious question. After all, kindness is just being nice to people, right? Well, that would be what the world means when it uses the term kindness. But many times, what the world means by something and what God means by something are not the same thing. See, worldly kindness is what I talked about. It's being nice to people. It's having a kind word to say to someone. And I'm not saying that these things are bad. They're good. But worldly kindness stops short of what biblical kindness or godly kindness would be. When the Bible talks about kindness, it goes further than just being nice to someone or having that kind word to say. The kind thing, the biblical kind thing, is kindness in action. It's goodness in action. Because actually, sometimes you'll find that the kind thing and the nice thing are not always the same. But that's another subject. We're not going to get into the difference between being kind and being nice. Like I said, biblical kindness carries the connotation of action. It is not just being nice and being kind to somebody, but it is doing good things for people. It is doing kindness. This can be doing things for them in a physical sense, like helping them with a task. But it can also be through less physical things, like being forgiving, being patient with others, and even through making a conscious effort to be loving towards our enemies. These are all manifestations of kindness in action. This is the kind of kindness that can work against envy, and it does so in 4 ways. The first is that kindness shifts our focus from the inward to the outward. Now, I don't know if you've picked up on this, but this is kind of a common theme with the heavenly virtues. This is because all of the sins that we have looked at in one way or another tells us that everything is about me and what I want and what I desire. But the virtues that align us with the will and character of God remind us that it is not indeed all about us. Because when our focus is inward and we look at the good things that others have, it begins to make us envious of what they have and desire it for ourselves. When our focus is inward and about us, we look at the good things, we want the good things. But when our focus becomes outward and we start looking at the good of others, we see those good things that others have, the same good things, but instead we can become happy for them that God has blessed them in the way that he has. Instead of looking at those good things as an object to be desired, we look at them as the wonderful blessing they are in someone else's life, and we can celebrate for them. A heart posture of kindness in action does not allow for envy to take root. Kindness is a position of wanting good for others. So any feelings of jealousy, which can be normal, will be fleeting and have a much smaller chance of affecting your relationships. The second way that kindness counters envy is that kindness fosters a desire to help and celebrate with others rather than a desire to harm and grumble. See, envy puts us at odds with the people around us when they receive good things. In a warped and twisted way, you might even believe that this person needs to be brought down a peg, since everything seems to be going their way, and you think maybe I can be the object of them being brought down a little bit. This is what brings a desire to harm and an attitude of grumbling, which plants the thoughts of, why not me, in your head. Kindness that seeks the best for others rewires your brain and tells you that you should not be grumbling about the successes of others, but as we are told in Romans 12:15, we should celebrate with them over their successes and the blessings that they are receiving. This will serve to further bind us together with people. Where envy may seek to use that good thing as a way to break your relationships down, kindness can use those good things to actually strengthen your relationships with the people in your lives, since that is what friends and family are meant to do with one another. And it makes our successes that much sweeter when we get to share them with others. In Romans 12:15, it says, "Rejoice with those who rejoice, and weep with those who weep." See, envy is going to tell you that the successes of others are somehow your loss. But the truth is that the successes of others are just that. They're successes. And if we claim to care about the people in our lives, the most caring and kind thing that we can do when somebody experiences a blessing, somebody experiences a success, is to celebrate alongside them. It is much harder to harbor feelings of envy when you are a part of the celebration of success. In fact, kindness goes a step further than just celebrating the successes of others. It actually prompts us to come alongside those who are experiencing blessings, who are experiencing successes, and see how we can help to make those blessings even grander. See, when my loved ones succeed, I want to see if there is a way that I can make that success even better because I love them. On the subject of love, the third way that kindness counters envy is that kindness promotes love and joy, which restores the damage that envy does to your spirit. See, kindness works hand in hand with love because, as we were told earlier in that verse, that love is kind. And it also works with joy and with happiness. And all of these things are medicine for your soul. In the book of Proverbs, we are told that envy rots the bones. We read that earlier. But in Proverbs 17:22, we are told that a merry heart, which encompasses all these things, happiness, joy, love, kindness, that I'm just talking about, that restores the damage that envy and all other manners of wickedness can bring to your soul. In Proverbs 17:22, it says, "A merry heart does good like medicine, but a broken spirit dries the bones." See, love, joy, and kindness, or as Proverbs puts it, a merry heart, is one of the best medicines out there for the soul. For the sadness and the resentment that envy brings. And that resentment that resides in our souls when envy takes hold damages our relationships. But kindness undoes that damage by repairing both our souls and our relationships. We can think of it as in this way, that the things that envy breaks, kindness can go back and fix. When we practice true biblical kindness, our spirit becomes resilient again. So sins like envy have a much harder time taking hold. And the fourth way that kindness counters envy is that kindness aligns our heart with the heart of God. See, all the heavenly virtues that we have talked about bring our hearts closer to the heart of God. This is because many of these traits are things that God has already shown to us, his people. See, God has been exceptionally kind to his people, to us. Envy and the other sins take us out of alignment with the heart of God, but kindness is close to God's heart. God shows us his kindness every day with the many blessings that he pours out on us, his people. The most powerful example of the kindness of God is the gift of his son, Jesus. Anytime that we are able to move our heart more into alignment with God's, we make ourselves less prone to sin. Of course, none of us are ever going to be perfect in this regard. But perfection, I would say, it both is and is not the goal. Let me explain what I mean by that. We should be striving for perfection, but we also know that we are never going to get there. A good goal for us to look to is closeness to God. I want to draw as close to the heart of God as I can. And as I do that, I will begin to naturally sin less. I will never become sinless, but I can sin less. through the influence of the goodness of God in my life. Relationship with God is the goal for us. And if we are to have relationship with him, and if we want to grow in relationship with him, we also need to grow in kindness. The way that we grow in kindness is very similar to the rest of the virtues that we've talked about. Just like our last virtue of patience, kindness is listed amongst the fruits of the Spirit in the book of Galatians. This means that we must rely on God to help foster this within us. We must spend time with God, drawing closer to him in prayer, reading our word, so that our heart may naturally grow closer to his, and his kindness will begin to grow in us. Just as with all the other virtues, we need God. But we also have a role to play in our sanctification. God is the driving force, make no mistake, but we are to be willing participants in our sanctification, not merely passive bystanders. With that in mind, there are some practical ways that we can work with the Spirit within us to grow in kindness. The first is to practice positivity when it comes to the successes of others. What I mean by that is that when someone around you experiences a blessing, and you begin to feel that twinge of jealousy, that little voice within you that says, why that person and why not me? Why did they experience that blessing and it hasn't happened for me yet? You need to speak against it immediately. And instead find something kind that you can say about that person instead of whatever resentful thing you were thinking. I actually can share an area where I struggled with this for a very long time in my younger life. I married my wife when I was just before my 30th birthday. But early on in my 20s, I would watch as a lot of my friends began to get into relationships, become married, have children. And those feelings of envy over that started to grow up within me because every time I watched one of my friends get married, I would start thinking, why not me? And that envy, the one kind of beneficial thing was that I was able to not direct my envy towards that person, but I definitely directed it towards God, which was not a good thing. I started to tell God, why not me? Why are you blessing all these other people in this area and why not me? Where's my blessing? Where's my wife? Where are my children? When's that going to happen for me? It was never a good thing. It built resentment in my heart, not necessarily towards the people, but it built resentment in my heart towards God because I was angry that this blessing wasn't mine. I didn't practice positivity by looking at all the good things that I had in my life, and I just stayed in that resentment for a time. God had to work on me. He got me to a place where I could accept where I was and what I had. And then, as luck would have it, and I don't think it's luck at all, pretty soon after I came to that conclusion and I became content in where I was and what God had for me, not long after that, I met my wife. Instead of saying, why did that person get that and I didn't? Say to yourself, I am so glad that that person was blessed that way. I am so happy for them. It's going to be hard because you're going to feel that why not me mentality. But you got to catch yourself and you got to say, no, not why not me. How can I celebrate and be happy for this person? And this leads us right into the second thing that we can do. Congratulate people on their successes. And this is going to help rewire your brain and kill resentment because now you are taking part in the celebration as we are called to. So the next time you begin to feel jealous of someone that you have a relationship with because of some success or some blessing that has come into their life, instead of just sitting in that feeling of envy, that feeling of resentment, I want you to pick up the phone and call them. Tell them that you are happy for them. Tell them that you are so glad that they have experienced this blessing. And then maybe you can even take it a step further and find ways that you can help them succeed even more. If you are taking an active role in the successes of others, it becomes much harder to become envious of those successes. The last thing that you can do is more of an inward thing. When you are beginning to feel envious of what others have, take the time to list some of the blessings that you have and express gratitude to God over what you have and what he has blessed you with. When we are grateful for what we already have, it makes it easier to come to a place of kindness towards others. Sure, we may not have been blessed in the way that that other guy was blessed, but I still have many blessings in my life, and I have plenty to be thankful for, and I have plenty to praise God for. These are some of the ways that we can grow in kindness, that we can practice that positive mindset that will lead us closer to God. If there are any of you who are struggling in this area, much like I did last week, and I offered prayer for people who were struggling with wrath and wanted to grow in patience, I want to offer the same thing to you. If you feel like the area of kindness is one that you need to grow in, I want to offer you time after the service to come up, and I'll pray with you that God may help you grow in kindness if that's an area that you struggle in. If not, that's fine. But I want to offer you that opportunity, and I'm going to try to do that as much as I can going forward in these lessons. I want to offer you time and opportunities for prayer. But with that in mind, let us go before God in prayer. Father God, I love you and you are good. It is hard for us sometimes to practice a kind heart when feelings of envy and jealousy creep into our hearts, when we look at the blessings that others have and we wonder, why not us? So Lord, I pray that in this moment, if anyone is struggling with feelings of envy, that you would begin to work in their heart, that you would begin to convict them of those feelings of envy, and instead start to prompt their heart towards kindness. Remind them of the blessings that you have already given them. Remind them of the good things that happen in their lives, that even if they might not have that certain blessing that they feel like they wanted, or that certain thing that someone else has that they think they want, that they think they need, Lord, I pray that you would open their eyes to the goodness that is all around them. Open their eyes to the blessings that you have already poured out on them. And Lord, foster those feelings of kindness within us so that instead of looking at the successes of our brothers and sisters with a jealous eye, instead we can begin to look at the successes of our brothers and sisters as an opportunity to celebrate with them for the blessings that you have poured out on them. Lord, I pray that your people would be bound together in a spirit of kindness and love and empathy for one another, that we would begin to love one another the way that you have called us to love. And as we know, love is kind and not envious. So, Lord, I pray that your kindness will enter your people and would reign in your people. I ask that in your mighty and precious name. Amen.